I've cleared a little bit of space to work, and I'm going to work on one of the smaller buttons to show you the technique. Now it's really just a matter of stitching the beads onto the fabric, but there's a few tricks that will help to get a good even distribution of beads and weight within your design. First things first, I want to think about this as part of a necklace. So there's going to be a bottom and a top and two sides. So in order to keep this accurate while I'm adding everything else on, I am going to add a little grid in a contrast colour thread. I'm using a pale pink, and I'm just going to start with a double stitch and do a little running stitch right up from the bottom to the top. This is relatively easy to do with this type of fabric background because you can see the weave of the fabric. You can also see how easily, because the pile on the velvet is holding this fabric away from the surface of the button, how easily the needle goes through. So I've done a north to south or a top to bottom line. I'm now going to go around the edge and you can make relatively large stitches because nothing's going anywhere. Everything's very tight between the fabric, and the surface of the button. I'll move that reel of thread out of the way. And now I'm going to do a line left to right or east to west, west to east, however you want to see it. Now this is one of the smaller buttons, so I'm only going to put on these two lines. But if you were doing one of the larger buttons or something even bigger, it might be a good idea to put in lines in between, to divide into 8 sections, or possibly to put a line like that, 1, 2, 3, 4, so you can differentiate between the outer edge and the inner part of the area, because you're going to be good at putting on lots of different things. You need to be able to say that this area needs to weigh or be about as dense as this area here. So I've popped on my horizontal line. I'm just going to finish off this thread with a stitch, and it's only a marking out or a tacking line, so I can just trim the ends straight off. If these stitches eventually do show, I will just snip the thread and pull out the thread, but hopefully my beadwork is going to be so dense on top that that won't be necessary. Right, so I'm swapping from a contrast thread to a thread that matches my underlying fabric and the majority of the beads that I've chosen for this particular button front. Now I've got quite a selection here that I've taken from the main assortment. I've brought down my seed bead selection quite considerably. I've sort of halved it, and when I looked more closely at the beads, and these are the colours that will run through all the elements of the design. These bits will change. So I've got some odd bits and pieces, and I've sort of laid them on, planning out what I might want to do. Now it's quite important that I use things that will break the round shape of the button. So I want things that will go over the edge to break down the fact that it's a circular former. So I'm thinking of potentially something like, I thought I might have little crystal perhaps down the side there. I've got a poppy for in there, and I've got a little S for Spellbound because this is about memories after all, and a little cat, and the cat symbolises my mum, who used to be the manager of the bead shop, and it's a job she very much enjoyed and still reminisces about it. She was very happy, surrounded with lots of sparkly stuff and like-minded people. Now I've got some facets and things to fill in the gaps, and I've got a little sprig that isn't necessarily a bead, but it doesn't matter, I can stitch it on, and I think that will bring a bit of movement to that top corner. Now I'm planning that this button will be to the right hand side of the centre button, so I want the design to sort of push out that way rather than push into the centre. So I think that leaf will go quite nicely at that corner. So that's a brief sort of idea of what I want to achieve. Now I need to start to apply things. Now things like the flower and the poppy, they go straight on top and will conceal anything underneath. So that's quite useful if I've got stitches that are already hanging on or stitching on other items. So those two things will go on almost at the end. This one has to go on relatively early because the stitches around it won't be particularly attractive. And these items here that will be breaking the bottom edge also need to go on relatively early because I want to cover them with a bead and a flower later on. So let's get started. Now I want to break this bottom edge here with some loops of seed beads. I want to make sure that none of this sharp edge here shows through to the front. And I've got these little fruit here. Now these were actually on a former masterclass, one we did in, I think, 2022, when we did a necklace that was covered in fruit and flowers. So these are a leftover from that, which seems quite appropriate. I'm going to use that to be the main feature along this bottom edge. So I'm going to attach my thread. I'm just using a single thread, and this is a 9 D, but you can use whatever beading thread you normally use. And to give myself a sense of scale, I'm actually going to attach the fruit first. So these stitches don't have to be particularly neat, they just have to be secure. So that's where the top of that stem is going to go, so stitch through there. And I'll redo that one just because it's the first thing on, so it's going to get bashed around as I do my other stitches. I'm not just going to be held at the top, I want to hold it further down as well, so I'm going to do like a couching stitch. So that's a stitch just over the stem, and another one further down. Sorry, I keep catching my thread. I've got a pair of pliers just out of view, which I might need later to help me pull the needle through. Right, so those are nicely attached. They're still dangling, I've still got movement, but they're nice and firmly attached otherwise. Right, now we need to be able to blend these in to this edge. So I'm going to start by adding some loops of seed beads. So I'm going to come in just a little way from the edge. There's no right or wrong to this, it's a matter of experimenting. Now, if I was to put a loop on there, that's going to interfere with that, so I'm just going to put a small stitch to start with. I've got these nice size 10 seed beads on. I've got an 11 here, so any assortment will do the job. I wouldn't advise 15s though, because you'll be stitching forever. And I'm going to just put on a little stitch of 3 orange seeds just to cover up that first edge section. I'm using an odd number because an odd number will always form a nice arch or a loop with a bead in the centre rather than having a thread gap. Right, I'm going to go backwards a little way. I'm going to put a loop that will cross in front of that one. And this one will be a slightly longer one, so I've got 5 seed beads. Make a stitch. And then I need some longer ones. So that's 8, 9. And I'm doing these slightly on the slant, but they don't necessarily have to be. I'll do one that isn't. There we go, you get the idea. We're starting to break that edge. Now we could, if we wanted to, put on some dangly strands, so we could just come straight down, put a bead and go back up through, but I'm going to put another loop on, and then I'm going to add a few beads in front of it. So what should we go for? We'll go for this pink again, which works quite well. Right, so I've started to conceal that edge. I just want to lay on what I'm planning to put on again, so that I can see where things potentially might go. Right, so if I put everything on like that, you can see I've got a gap here, and I've probably got a gap there as well now. How does that look with that on top? Now that sort of works, doesn't it? So let's try putting that on. So what I'm doing is I'm working outwards rather than plonking things on randomly. I'm working upwards, building up layers towards this centre point. So that's going to go there. I want it to cover the end of this and the top of these loops. So is my needle in the right place? Let's bring it over to here because the stitch will be easier, I think. As you can see, it's not hard and fast embroidery technique, this. It's more put things where you want them to be. Right. I think that's holding in the right place, but I'm going to restitch because obviously that's quite a heavy bead. I'm only using a single thread. That's better. Right, let's have another experiment, and it's a lot of this is sort of yes, perhaps no, I like this better. Right, I think that works okay. And it's quite important to have a solid figure like this, which is the glass bead. So it's relatively large block of colour against, although this is a large block of colour as well, the seed beads, you can see that the colour changes as the beads meet one another. So it's more of a complex texture than this one here. So you need the contrast of the two on the same piece of work, otherwise it just gets too busy and you can't see what's happening. So pop those back again. Yes, I'd like to get that little cat in, but I'd also like to put something else here to break this edge. So let's bring the needle down there. This time, instead of loops, I'm going to put on some of these lovely facets. I'm going to put a seed bead on first, then a facet and a seed bead at the end. And obviously the seed bead at the end is the anchor. So we can come back up, take a stitch. Yeah, that works. And it's all a case of just seeing what's best, repositioning the needle and putting the next thing on. Now, I wouldn't suggest just putting one bead on like that. They're better in clusters, and I think most florists would tell you everything goes in threes, and that's not a bad rule, but we'll see. Pop that one on. You can see I'm really cramming these things in because I want to conceal the fabric underneath. I also want to get on as much as possible because, well, that's the purpose of this, is to put on as many different textures as we can. Right, I think one more. I'm putting the seed bead on underneath just because it lifts them off the surface of the fabric, but they're not essential. But by the same token, you could put on 6 seed beads and have them dangling rather than pulled up tight. Now let's have a little look. Okay, that's alright, I prefer those in that shape, so I'm going to cheat and wrap the thread around them. Take a stitch and I'll hold them in that little cluster. Okay, right, back with those. Yeah, quirky, but it works. And I think that's probably the story of Spellbound in a nutshell there. As this is all about memories and things we've done. As you can see, as you get more on, it starts to get more congested, and you need to just take a breath sometimes and find what's caught the thread up and go and uncatch it. Okay, so you see we're starting to build now. You can see how it's starting to become a something. Now I've got some space here to fill, and I've got some space here, so I'm going to do some more loops here and potentially add in some different beads. Now I have a little rummage on my table. I've got some pink crystal. I think that will work. As you can see, I'm, as usual, introducing orange. Can't resist. But it seems to work with the ruby theme. Well, that's my excuse anyway. So these are little loops with a crystal bead on. That was a big sigh from Molly Dog. And that's a big sigh from Indie Dog, which is basically I'm playing with beads again and not paying them any attention. Now I don't like this here, so I'm going to go in and put a bead in that space. Now I know nobody else will notice, but I need to be happy with what I've done. So I'm going to put another crystal in there. And just direct the needle to somewhere I can grab it. That's better. Right, back with that, back with that. Still got a bit of concealing to do here, loopage, whatever you wish to call it. Now that is a pink flower that's going on there with red, so I need a contrast in my loops, and oh dear, it's going to have to be orange. This is a particularly nice orange. This is a Miyuki size 11 called Harvest Orange, I believe. And I'm afraid I use it at every opportunity. Let's have a little look now. Yes, yes. You can see the cat's partly concealed, but that's part of the joy of this. We want to make them real sort of treasure troves of thoughts and things. So yeah, if I can pull that in tight there and that in tight there, it's going to leave a space here that I need to decorate first before I put these two things on top. And the first thing that needs to go on is that little flourish. So needle across there. Yep. Because I've taken quite a big stitch through the underlying fabric, I'm just going to secure it with a double stitch before I apply this. Now you can see why I didn't put this one on earlier. Just going to catch the thread at every opportunity. There we go, pop that back on, pop that back on, and you can see it's really coming together now, but we can see that fabric there. So I'm going to go away, I'm going to fill in this little gap and show you how to apply the last two items. As you can see, I have filled in this little bit of extra space here. I've put three of these nice bright pink beads on that I absolutely adore, and we've got a couple of flat beads. I've also made sure that that edge behind the flat beads is covered so that it's broken up again, it's not showing the edge of the velvet. Now I've left a bit of space in the middle, probably a smaller space than you would expect, but the idea is that these now pull in to conceal that space, and you get that really full, luscious look. Now you can see that it's way beyond the original shape and size of the covering button that was underneath, but that's the idea. We don't want it to look like a covering button, we want it to look like a cluster of gorgeousness. So I would like that poppy to be right at the top, so this has got to go on first. So we're thinking about layers. We've done the bottom layer, this is the middle layer, that's the top layer, and it's just a matter of stitching them on. So let's see where that will pull in nicely. And you might find with some of these bigger ones that you stitch them on, take them off, move them about 2 millimeters. It makes all the difference, and I'm afraid that is the lot of the beader, because we all like things to be just right, and we're not happy until they are. So, oops. Now I'm using a 9 D thread, but I have found that over time it's starting to fluff up coming through the velvet. Now I'm sure other beading threads will have exactly the same issue, but I would suggest that you don't use too long a piece of thread, because it will just get terribly fluffy. If you need to, you can start a new one. Now by sewing that on, it's collapsed that middle, so I'm going to look about putting something in the middle, just because no, those are too big. How about that little crystal? Quite like that one, which is a nice tomato red, but I think it's too big, so I think we'll go for that pink. I'm just going to put it on horizontally rather than put a seed bead to hold it on. Yep, that works well. Okay, now we need to come into the middle here to put the poppy on. Now this is going to be a little bit more difficult, because you can see there's a lot of traffic around, so this is where, if you have a stash of bent needles, it's a good idea to swap to one of your bent needles. Right, I'm in the space, but I've caught the thread, so that needs to come off. That's it. I can see that's moving, so that obviously needs another stitch, but I'll do that when I've put the poppy on. Right, now I'm in the space. This happens to have a nice convenient bead in the middle. Now I've noticed there's a mistake on that side, so, which I think is why it wasn't used initially. Let's see if I can flip these petals the other way, push that through the middle. Yes, I can. So now the mistake's at the back. And I'm going to pass through this bead. There we go. Now this is where you might need to resort to pliers, because your fingers aren't able to get into that space. So I'm going to use the end of the pliers to grab the point of the needle to pull it out. There we go. Lo and behold, that rogue stitch has come to the front again. So I'm going to have to conceal that with some seed beads, but I'm not too worried about that at the moment. I just want to get this attached. So go through it again, and this time I bring that's better. Let's have a look at that. Now that's pulled in nicely, it's not too tight in. Now if I thought it was pulling in too tightly and disappearing, I'd put another bead underneath it, so there'd be a seed bead or something to hold it outwards, but I think that's okay. And I'm just going to secure this little branch with another stitch because it's still moving. And we want everything to be secure. That's it. And then I can finish off with just a double stitch. And trim. So you can see from the back view, we've gone all the way around the edge of the button. We haven't used that last sort of 2 to 3 millimeters, but the whole of the top surface has been covered. It's very much not a round feature anymore, and we have one of the elements for our memory necklace. Now I have to confess, I've been busy and I've made 2 other components. Obviously this is going to be quite a big design with lots of memories in 40 years, so of course it's going to be a big design. So we've got a centerpiece. This is made on a large button. Got the next one out on that side, that's made on a large button. And I'm going to now think about joining them together. So that's going to be the next video, and I'll see you then. Thank you for watching.